Hey everyone, Kaz here from Two Book Watch Snobs. Incredibly excited and honored to be sharing with you a video watch review on the Gavox Longitude. Now, Gavox is a Belgian-based microbrand that has been operating since about 2011. Some other popular Gavox releases you most likely heard of would be the Avid Diver, also the Gavox Rhodes, which we've talked about a lot on the show. We have a review on the twobookwatchsnobs.com website on the Gavox Rhodes. The interesting thing about Gavox as a micro brand, or really a boutique brand, that I think it's fair to say they've really ascended to at this point, is that all Gavox watch releases and basically every release in the Gavox watch collection is the impetus behind it is something that's very personal and design expressive and passionate, or at least passion or speaks to the passion of Michael Happy, who is the brand owner. So Michael Happy is the sole brand owner, designer, really person you're mainly going to talk to when you interact with Gavox watches. If they're on your social, or if you email them, or even if you see them at a trade show, it is going to be Michael Happy. And the only reason I'm emphasizing that so greatly is that if you do decide to get into Gavox watches as a boutique brand, which I honestly highly recommend you do, it is easily one of my favorite boutique micro brands at this point. It is incredibly important to know that if Michael Happy has a watch in the Gavox collection, it is because there is a very personal story or passion behind it. So the Gavox Rhodes that I just mentioned is a quartz chronograph that is Michael Happy's love letter to road trips. So of the core collection in the Gavox Rhodes catalog, each watch is dedicated to a different highway route that is like an iconic road trip route to take, and it's all over the world. It's not just Eurocentric or anything like that. So that's really really important to know as we dive into switching cameras here. Boom, the Gavox Longitude. The Gavox Longitude is the brand's ode to old time maritime exploration, old sea voyages. This idea of this spirit or this impetus to bravely explore the oceans with very, very limited resources or very limited technology, at least what we would compare that to. So those early pioneers, those early ocean exploration kind of iconic figures and stories and histories and things like that. So obviously the ocean is a factor in the Gavox Longitude because the dial, the dial looks like the ocean, as you see it here on my wrist. So let's do this in order of operations. I will be talking about the wearing experience of the watch. That will transition into the case. That will then also be spending time talking through the dial and the movement. I then want to talk about the bracelet a little bit. Then I'll give an overall impression of the timepiece here. Just as a nice way to wrap it up. So basically, let's do this. Let's jump into the overall wearing experience. So I have a 6.75-inch wrist. The wearing experience on this is very interesting. It's actually something I've encountered several times with releases from Gavox watches. So this entire piece is grounded by the fact that this is 39 millimeters in diameter. This is a 39 millimeter diameter watch on my 6.75-inch wrist. But this is where it gets interesting. So the website will list the lug-to-lug measurement. Let me take the watch here. The website will list the lug-to-lug measurement as approximately 47 millimeters. And so the distance from that lug tip to that lug tip is indeed 47 millimeters. However, this is an integrated bracelet watch, which means, one of two things will happen. Either this center link will articulate down, and that will be a true lug-to-lug kind of wrist wearing experience, or the center link will be fixed and it will actually extend the wearing experience. This center link is fixed, which means this wearing experience, while lug to lug is technically 47 millimeters, the actual span of the watch is closer to 52 millimeters. And in addition to that, the thickness of the watch, I think on the website, is listed at 12.8. Let me get the tiny carpet out of here, or at least move it aside. The thickness of the watch, I believe, is listed at approximately 12.8 millimeters on the website. On my calipers, according to my calipers, I got it closer to 13.5, which is more what I would expect with an automatic GMT movement, which we'll talk about in a moment. So what's happening here is actually a very dynamic wearing experience, and it's actually kind of similar to what I had on the Gavox Rhodes. The Gavox Rhodes lug-to-lug span was also pretty long. That was not an integrated bracelet. It was long just because it was just long. But the diameter itself was much more appropriate. The result is basically this that I'll share with folks. If the dimensions make you a bit unsure, if you think it might be too small for your wrist, I would say this 52 millimeter lug to lug experience does save you. Now, if you feel that the 52 millimeter lug to lug experience would be too large for you, I will say it is then saved by the 39 millimeter diameter case dimension. So the overall impression here is just, it is a very, very wearable. I'm just putting the carpet back in shot here. Sorry. It is a very, very wearable watch. The overall wearing experience is very nice, and I actually find it to be a little refreshing, because once I realized there's integrated watch bracelet, and once I realized these center links here didn't articulate down, I was pretty worried. But then I put it on, and you can probably get a sense just in the view here. It wears very nicely. Let me see here. What can I compare it to? I can compare it to, you know what's funny? Let me do this. I can compare it to my Grand Seiko SPG V233. And the only reason I'm doing this is because it was within reach. And this watch is 40 millimeters. But do you kind of get the sense how this almost feels a little bit bigger? It's because of how well balanced the case dimensions are on the Gavox Rhodes. The way the case curves into the lugs and really the integrated lug experience. It is a 39 millimeter watch that honestly can go either way for your wrist size. So that said, I would like to talk a bit about the case. The case is very interesting. The case is just one of what I will say 3 aspects that make this a timepiece really for anyone that how can I describe it? Some folks with their collections are very, very into watches that are high detail, high texture, very, very visually tactile, if that's a way of describing it. But basically, this watch is there are a lot of different textures being balanced in this watch, and you can actually also note that in the case. The case lugs itself are actually very, very interesting. They're almost faceted, and we see that faceting continue to the bracelet, which we'll talk about. But the result is something almost very, I'll say gem-like, because I mean, obviously, if they're faceted. So the way it's faceted is that it's supposed to be a complement to the shapes of the bracelet. And what actually ends up happening is visually the watch ends up feeling a little bit slimmer. So again, that comes down to balancing measurements. Even though this is a 52 lug-to-lug wearing experience watch, if these lugs weren't faceted in this way, it'd probably feel a little bulky. But that's not the case that you're getting here. The actual side profile, it's a very, very clean matte finish on the side here. It is a cylinder profile in the center belly of the watch, and then you get these facets as they come out. When I'm looking straight on, you can notice the primary shape is that of just a circle, and then you have these very, very kind of, what's the word? Tapered, faceted lugs that lead into the bracelet itself. So the overall impression is very, very nice. The bezel on top is a GMT bezel. It will track. So in total, you could do 3 time zones on this. You can do your main home time. You could do an additional time zone with the GMT hand or your hour hand. We'll talk about that. This is actually a true GMT movement, quote unquote, true GMT, as opposed to a collar GMT, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And then in addition to that, you can use the GMT bezel to also track an additional 3rd time zone. Now, what's a lot of fun is this is a 24-hour bezel, but it also tracks half hour, so you can do 30-minute kind of middle hour increments and everything like that. And it's bidirectional. It can go either way. And it is a stainless steel bezel. It's nicely legible. It's a little hard. There you go. The font goes all the way, or at least as far as it can go, on the actual bezel itself. So the overall legibility of the bezel is very nice as well. So the case back will also feature this, let me see here. It's, is it a relief or an engraving? Is it, I'm not really up on my design terms, but this is a very nice, I'll call it engraving. Very nice engraving here. It's a bit hard to see. So we'll actually see this on the, I have the black model here as well. So the black model, which is the Black Diamond model, has an exhibition caseback, which you can see there for the Miyota 9075 movement, whereas this here is the solid caseback. Now, an interesting con that I want to talk through, and I'll recap my pros and cons at the end, is that this crown, while this crown is actually a pretty good size, and it's very, very tactile once you get in there, it's actually a little bit hard to, at least for me, access. So, and I think it's the way these crown guards are angled. So if you look here, do you see how the crown is closer to the back of the watch than it is the front of the watch? And by that I mean the front of the watch has a bit of lift ahead of the crown. That actually ends up creating a bit of an obstacle for you to really get in there and unscrew it, because this is a screw down crown. This is probably a good point to mention that this is a 200-meter water resistance case. So if you for some reason did want to dive with this watch, you could. If you wanted to dive with the Gavox with a Gavox timepiece, you could do it with this, but I would also probably recommend the Gavox Avid Diver. So that is one interesting con about the case here. The crown is a little bit hard to get to. It's kind of, you kind of get that a little bit of extra friction as you dig in there. I will mention, if your wrist is smaller than mine, so it's 6.75 inches in diameter, it is possible for this 52 millimeter lug-to-lug wearing experience to maybe border on a bit too large. That is going to be a personal preference piece there. My wrist shape is a bit flatter on top, so I can kind of get away, at least in terms of the wearing experience, with something a little bit longer in the lug-to-lug area. So I want to transition from the case, and I want to talk about the dial and the movement. So again, this is an ode to old maritime exploration, and sort of this concept of the golden age of exploration, 1500s, 1600s, everything like that. And the reason I bring that up is that Michael Happy has a very close personal familial tie with this concept of how ocean exploration has changed, specifically in regards to the Dutch navigator Dirk Hartog, who Michael Happy is a descendant of. Dirk Hartog is the main inspiration behind wanting to do this piece. So this is not just, Michael Happy likes ocean exploration. It's that Michael Happy obviously loves ocean exploration, but there's also this personal attachment to it as well in regards to his ancestor, Dirk Hartog. So the idea here is to pay homage to a time period when explorers and ocean explorers did what they could with the technology they had available at the time. And when you compare it to the technology that we have available to us now, you get that really interesting juxtaposition. So speaking of juxtaposition, I do want to talk about something that is happening here. I mentioned textures. I mentioned almost this idea of being visually tactile. Look at the juxtaposition between the differences in the texture of the dial here. So again, it looks like the surface of the ocean. There's this very, very intricate organic movement to it. No totally straight lines. This is a shape or a pattern of shapes and lines that you could very easily see in nature. That is very, very interestingly balanced and juxtaposed against, look how different the texture and the shape is on the bracelet. This faceting is that very much of something man-made, man-controlled, not necessarily a natural shape that you would see. It actually ends up creating a very interesting wearing experience. So let me just actually put it on my wrist, and let me do a hashtag wrist roll so you can see what I'm talking about. Watch how light hits the bracelet and then goes to the dial. Do you see what I mean? There's a lot of different texture play that's happening here, and I'm totally on board for it because it's absolutely working. So more on the dial here. You have a little date window here. This is the GMT hand. So I mentioned before, this is the Miyota 9075. This is a true GMT movement. And by that, I mean when you go to, again, the crown's hard to get to sometimes. When you go to manipulate I guess the additional time zone hand, the additional time zone hand is actually your main hour hand. And the idea behind this as a quote unquote true GMT is that your hand here, your main sort of offset hand with this big arrow on it, is supposed to be the time zone back at home, your home time zone. And then you're supposed to be able to easily change the native time zone that you're in to your actual physical location. So when we say true GMT versus collar GMT, which is the other kind of phrase for it, that's what we're talking about. The difference between being able to independently move your hour hand. And the idea behind that is once I get somewhere, I can keep my big GMT hand to my home time zone so I can always know what time it is back home with my family, but then I can easily just change my hour hand to my physical location's time zone. So that's actually a very interesting value prop about this watch. Camera change, boom. If you were looking for a true GMT under $1,000, and we'll talk about price point in a moment, this is an excellent option. Rocking the Miyota 9075. It is a true GMT movement. Now, what I will say is all of this dial texture and all of these different sort of visual elements can make legibility a little difficult sometimes. You know, if I'm able to catch the light, it's fine. Obviously, I have no issue seeing the GMT hand. That is very, very visible because it has this, within the very much the brand design of Gavox, this orange hand. But what I will share is I also have the Gavox Longitude Black Diamond model here. This model in particular, I'm just throwing it on, is even harder on the legibility front. So what I would share is this: if you were looking for a true GMT with a very, very interesting story that was visually beautiful, this is an excellent option. If you were looking for something that you could almost treat as an everyday watch where you can just kind of quickly glance at it and know the time and then not fuss with it anymore, this would probably be difficult to work with in regards to that. That's just my experience in regards to the legibility, especially on the Black Diamond model here. So let me throw this one on. This colorway on the Gavox.com website is the Sapphire. There are, let me count them. There are 4 dial colors in total. There's this one, which is the Sapphire. There's this one. So this dial is available in 2 options. It is available in this version, which you see with the kind of totally blacked out model, black dial, black bezel, black bracelet, black case. This is the Black Diamond. There is a version of this dial in the stainless steel body that is the onyx. So there's the Sapphire, there's the onyx, there's the turquoise, which is very much more of almost like a classic seafoam turquoise, seafoam green, very, very, very fun. And then there's pearl, which is just white. The pearl, I'm looking at it right now on my other screen, so that's why you're all seeing the side of my head turn. The pearl in particular seems especially beautiful. If you were interested in this watch and you loved the texture, but maybe you wanted it a little bit more subdued, I would very seriously look at the pearl model, which is basically just white, because then the orange really pops and it's really beautiful. So the Miyota 9075, like I said, it's true GMT movement. Has the date wheel as an automatic GMT. That's why when I made that call out before, it being a little thick was to be expected. I have it on my calipers at 13.5/13.6 millimeters. So, but that ends up being balanced really, really well, just because of how I mentioned and talked about the case dimension piece previously. Lume on here is very nice. All of the markers, all of the hands feature lume. It is BGW9, so it's going to have a really, really nice blue color to it. And if you look, you can see on the tip of the second hand, that is the trademark Gavox V, or I guess that's the counterweight of the second hand. That is the trademark Gavox V. So a lot of these amount to really, really nice touches. They just give you an overall dial presentation that is pretty unforgettable. That's the truth. I think that's something that's really interesting to talk through as we look at so many microbrand pieces. It is really easy for watches to be forgettable, but then at the same time, you don't want your watch to be memorable, but then you know, gaudy. I don't think this is quote unquote, gaudy. I think this is featuring a lot of really good balances between textures and shapes. So we talked about the case, talked about the dial, talked about the movement a little bit. I want to transition to the bracelet. Bracelet we talked about before carries on this sense of almost being a faceted gem cut. Bracelet carries that on as well, and it articulates it between these main link body segments, which are more faceted, but then those are countered really nicely by these center links, which are more, oh, sorry, let me get into focus there, boom, rounded. There you go. So, and they're very polished too. The whole idea with this is to bounce and roll light and then give you a sense of movement. So obviously I think that's the idea behind that, is to evoke the movement of the ocean and everything like that. So the bracelet is very nice. It does not taper towards the end, not that I noticed on my calipers. It also really doesn't need to taper, truthfully. It is not a large wearing watch at 39 millimeters in diameter. Now, these are screw lugs, which made sizing so nice. Let me see if you can get in there, see the screws. And you can also see I have 5 micro adjustments, which again makes it so nice to get this watch dialed in at a spot that is very, very, very comfortable. The the interior clasp area here is basically milled, whereas this outer part here appears to be stamped. It has the Gavox logo. It is logo. It has the Gavox logo on it. It is a dual button pusher clasp release as well. The bracelet here, oh yeah, the bracelet here is also a quick change. So another con I would like to point out in this ocean, pun intended, of pros is now you can see it there, kind of. Let me get it. There you go. See those 2 little dots? Those 2 little dots. This is a quick change bracelet, which will make it very easy to take the watch off. Now, the only difficult part can be getting the watch back on. I found these very, very fiddly for myself personally, because you really, really, really got to get it in there and make sure it's lined up properly. The advantage is if you didn't want to use a strap tool, or if you didn't have a strap tool, the quick change aspect does make this a very, very nice additional feature as well. So let me see here. We talked about the case, we talked about the movement, talked about the dial, talked about the bracelet as well. Am I missing anything? I think that's basically everything about all the little individual elements. If you can tell, I very much love this watch. In regards to overall thoughts, I think this enters the segment of sub $1,000 USD true GMT movements in a very, very strong way. Now, I will share that if you go to the Gavox.com website, all of Gavox's pricing is in euros, and it will include an additional tax of approximately 21%. So on the website, it will list the price of this watch at 950 euros, but the true price is going to be, I think, closer to, I can't remember what the actual conversion is in euro, but when you subtract that tax, as long as you're shipping outside of Europe, you don't pay that tax. When you subtract that tax out, it drops to a little under $900 USD, which for a bracelet, true GMT, very highly refined timepiece, I think is an incredible price, truthfully. So I will go, let me go through here. I want to recap. Oh, I want to talk about this really, really quick. Something I thought was interesting. If anyone knows more about this, please feel free to chime in and let me know. But it is highlighted on the website that the stainless steel, so all the stainless steel surfaces of this watch have been subjected to a proprietary process called, I'm going to say this wrong, called sterizing. That sounds like I'm not saying it right. Either way, it is a proprietary technique which increases the overall durability and hardness of the watch. I want to point out another con right here for everyone as I go and fix it. If you do not really screw these screw links down, you'll see it there. They will start to pop up a little bit. There are different methods and techniques that you can use to ensure that doesn't happen. The reason that is happening is as the bracelet articulates and as you move and everything like that, it will slowly start to unscrew itself. Now, I don't want to say that's indicative of the model because this is a review piece, which means it has made the rounds. So it is entirely possible that that particular screw may just have been screwed and unscrewed so many times that it might be a little bit threadbare. So I'm only pointing that out in case you've had the experience of that happening on other brand new watches, which I have had as well. So I don't want to necessarily call that out as a proper con. It's just something that I noticed on my watch. But if you are an owner of the Gavox Longitude, please let me know if that's something that you have noticed on your brand new model as well. So in terms of pros, as we go through and round out this video, let me switch cameras. Boom, camera 2. I don't know what camera this is. Pros, this is under 1,000 USDs. This is under 1,000 USD, which I think is great. It's getting increasingly difficult to find watches that are very special, that are expressive of an actual unique design impetus for under $1,000. So that is very, very special. Speaking of which, another huge pro is just how personal the design of the Gavox Longitude collection is to the Gavox Watches owner, Michael Happy. Other huge pro, very, very balanced specs. Like I mentioned before, this watch would be totally appropriate on someone with a wrist size of mine, 6.57 inches, or a wrist even larger. That balance of different sort of elements is also extended to the different balances of textures on the watch as well, between these organic lines on the dial and then these more sort of clearly, quote unquote, man-made, almost gem-like facets of the bracelet as well. Oh, and the bracelet is also very comfortable. Something I want to point out, the way the relationship between the outer links and the center links actually gives you really, really nice articulation. And what this amounts to, let me get that in focus, boom. What this amounts to, these are basically flat, is it can actually conform to your wrist a lot nicer. I want to, in comparison, show you on maybe a lesser quality bracelet, no offense to my Christmas chrono, on a lesser quality bracelet, that does not happen. So I'm pressing those together, and you see how they're not laying flat? That basically means this bracelet will not conform to the shape of my wrist in the same way that the Gavox Longitude bracelet will. And it does. It is a very comfortable bracelet. So in regards to cons, the crown is a little bit hard to access just because of how far back set it is on the actual case itself. In addition to that, legibility can be an issue for some folks. Maybe not on the white dial. If you were to go for the white dial or possibly the turquoise, you would probably be in pretty good shape. On the Sapphire, every now and then when I was wearing it outside, I had some issues. On the onyx dial, or especially on this entire kind of Black Diamond presentation, that is especially the case. Although I guess the lume pops out a little bit more against the black, so the legibility piece in regards to this watch can be personal preference, because I know some folks have different tolerances than others. So in addition to that, in regards to cons, some people might want something a little bit more balanced or subtle in their GMT timepiece, or even in just their general timepiece. So this might be a little much for some, especially in regards to how light hits it, how these facets play off of the contours and shape and lines of the dial as well. And then the last con I'll share is that it is entirely possible, while I mentioned the case dimensions are balanced, if your wrist is smaller than mine, I'm at 6.75 inches, or if your wrist shape is particular, and again, you would be the best judge of that, it is possible for this lug-to-lug experience to be a little long. And by long, that would basically mean, let me just show you here an example. These lugs don't hang over my wrist. What can sometimes happen is if the lug-to-lug experience is on the wider side, the lugs will actually then go and hang over the entire flat surface of your wrist. That might be a difficult wearing experience for folks if you feel your wrist is not a good fit for this 52-ish millimeter kind of lug to lug wearing experience. So with that said, I want to switch back to camera one. Boom. This is the Gavox Longitude. I would highly recommend this watch to anyone even remotely interested in the timepiece. If you have any questions on this watch or on the wearing experience or on any of the pieces that I went through, if there's anything I maybe forgot to talk about, please totally let me know in the comments. Also, please be sure to subscribe to the Two Book Watch Snobs channel. I will be doing watch reviews at least once a week, in addition to the Two Book Watch Snobs podcast. We'll do that once a week where my better half and broke watch snobbery, Mike and I will talk through different topics. We'll kind of shoot the shit. Maybe we'll talk about watches. It's just us basically hanging out. But again, huge thank you to Gavox Watches and a huge heart emoji for the Gavox Longitude here. Again, this is the Black Diamond version. Yep, Black Diamond. I'm sure I got that right. It is very stunning. So with that said, this concludes my review of the Gavox Longitude. Again, let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Otherwise, thank you all so much for the time. I'll see you on the next video. Later.